a decorated Marine who survived gunfire in Quang Tri, died silently in a hospital bed because someone pulled the plug without his son's consent. Over 50 years of service and sacrifice, and in the end, he was treated like he never existed. Shocking, isn't it? A woman who wasn't legally his wife, no marriage certificate, no power of attorney, was still treated by the hospital as his grieving widow and given the authority to end his life. How does something so outrageous even happen in America, to a war veteran? If this happened to my father, how many other fathers have been quietly erased the same way? It was 2:46 in the morning when the phone rang, the kind of call you never want to get, the kind that makes your stomach twist before you even pick up. I didn't recognize the number, but something in me already knew. I answered anyway. "Is this Mr. Robert Kane's son?" a tired voice asked. "Yes," I said, sitting up in bed, heart pounding. "This is North Memorial Hospital. Your father was brought in tonight with severe respiratory failure. He's being intubated now. I'm sorry, we had to put him on a ventilator." Time stopped. The room was dark except for the blinking router light across the wall. I couldn't even find my words. My father, Robert Kane, was 73, a former Marine Vietnam vet. The kind of man who never asked for help but would walk through fire if someone needed him. And now he was being kept alive by a machine. They wouldn't let me in right away. COVID protocol. I stared at the ceiling for hours, playing out every memory I had with him like a film reel on loop. But none of it made sense. He always had trouble breathing. I remember that wheeze, that dry, crackling cough that would come in bursts when the weather turned cold. We all thought it was allergies, or maybe some long-forgotten cigarette habit, though he claimed he never smoked a damn day in his life. As I grew older, I realized it was something deeper, something he carried back from the jungles of Vietnam, silent and invisible. He rarely talked about the war. When I was a kid, he'd tell me stories, mostly the funny ones, like how he and his buddy Frank tried to catch a pig to roast it for Thanksgiving near the base camp. But every once in a while, something darker would creep in. One night, after too many bourbons, he looked me dead in the eye and said, "You know, they didn't just shoot at us out there, they poisoned us from the sky." At the time, I thought it was metaphor. But I never forgot that look. Now, sitting in my kitchen, watching the coffee pot hiss and bubble, I wondered if this was the moment that poison finally claimed him. The hospital called again at 5:12 a.m. "He's stable," the nurse said, "but sedated. He's not conscious." That word, sedated. It was like death, only more polite. By noon, I was outside the hospital, face mask on, fingers frozen around a cup of vending machine coffee. I called Carl, my father's longtime partner. She picked up after 3 rings. "They put him on the vent," I said. A long pause. "Well, maybe it's for the best," she finally said. "He's been tired for a long time." I hated how calm she sounded. I hated that she wasn't crying. "He's a fighter," I said. "You know that. He's also 73, and he can barely breathe." I wanted to scream, so what? He survived Vietnam. He survived losing my mom. He survived everything. But I just clenched my jaw and stared at the glass doors, where masked doctors walked back and forth like ghosts. That night, I couldn't sleep. I played voicemails from him on repeat, old messages, asking if I'd made it home safe, if I'd fed the damn dog. His voice was still there, somewhere in that little black box. Alive. At 2 a.m., I opened a drawer in my desk and pulled out the old photo. The one where he stood in uniform, 21 years old, jaw clenched, holding an M16 in one hand and a cigarette in the other. Behind him, the jungle blurred in the haze of sun, or maybe it was the mist from the Agent Orange they said wasn't dangerous. Only now, 50 years later, I was beginning to think it had always been killing him slowly. He was always the tough one, the type of father who fixed his own brakes, patched the roof in the middle of a snowstorm, and never asked for help even when he was clearly hurting. As a kid, I both admired and feared that quiet resilience. But in moments like this, it scared me, because I knew he'd never admit how bad it really was. Back when I was 12, I remember walking past his bedroom one night and hearing him cough, a long dragging sound, like his lungs were trying to claw their way out. I stood there, frozen, because after the coughs he let out a groan, not pain exactly, more like frustration, like someone losing a war inside his own body. I asked him the next morning if he was okay. He waved it off with a chuckle. "Just old jungle lungs," he said, as if it were a joke. I didn't get it then. Now, I was starting to. As dawn broke, I watched a hazy orange light stretch across the hospital parking lot. There was something ironic about that color, orange, the same shade as the barrels of herbicide that had rained down on his unit decades ago. Agent Orange. I'd read the articles, I'd seen the footage, but I never thought it would come for him like this. Not silently, not slowly, not stealing his breath one cell at a time. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, and whispered aloud, "You better not go out like this, Dad. Not without a fight. They say war changes a man, but for my father, it didn't just change him. It rooted itself deep inside his bones, and it stayed there, long after the uniforms were folded, the medals were boxed, and the welcome home banners had faded into dust." In 1968, Robert Kane was barely 21 when he stepped off the plane in Da Nang. A skinny Midwestern kid with a stubborn jaw and a buzz cut, ready to fight for a country that hadn't yet decided if it wanted him back. The world back home was on fire with protests, but in Vietnam fire came from the sky, the jungle, and sometimes even your own footsteps. He was assigned to the 3rd Marine Division, deployed deep in Quang Tri Province, just below the DMZ. The first thing he noticed wasn't the heat or the smell, it was the silence. That eerie, heavy silence before gunfire. The jungle never sleeps, he would later say. It just listens, and when it moves, you better pray it's not the wind. It was only weeks into his tour that he experienced the first spray run. He and his unit had been out on a morning patrol when they heard the buzz. High above the tree line, a C-123 Provider aircraft sliced through the sky, leaving behind what looked like white mist. He thought it was fog at first, or maybe smoke from a nearby fire. But then it started raining down. It stuck to your skin like glue, he told me once. Had a sweet smell, chemical sweet like a fake orange peel. He didn't flinch, none of them did. Command hadn't warned them. No one knew what it was, only that it cleared the brush, killed the cover, made it easier to see Charlie before Charlie saw you. They called it rainbow herbicide, but the barrel had a single word, orange. He watched it coat the leaves, the dirt, his boots. One guy laughed and said, "Hell, it's better than napalm, ain't it?" They all laughed. That was how they survived, by pretending things weren't what they were. Private Jack Delaney was the kind of guy who whistled even during firefights. From Alabama, always chewing on sunflower seeds, he had a photo of his high school sweetheart folded up in his helmet liner. They shared a tent. Robert never said it aloud, but I think Jack reminded him of the life he left behind, the normal one, with prom nights and greasy diner fries. They were patrolling a clearing just east of Firebase Fuller. It was quiet, too quiet. Robert had that gnawing feeling in his gut, the kind that creeps in when something's off but you can't name it yet. The birds had stopped chirping. That was the giveaway. Then the world cracked open. Gunfire erupted from the tree line. Akai rounds sprayed across the tall grass like a blender with the lid off. Robert hit the dirt instinctively. Jack didn't. He turned to yell something, maybe a warning, maybe a joke, and a bullet tore through his chest like paper. There was no time to cry, no time to scream. Training kicked in. They returned fire, crawled through mud, dragged the wounded. The ambush lasted 7 minutes. When it ended, the jungle looked like it had been chewed up and spit back out. That night, Robert sat by Jack's body, what was left of it. He didn't speak, didn't smoke, just stared. When the chaplain came, offering to say a few words, Robert just shook his head. "He was my tent mate," he said quietly. "That's enough." He wrote a letter to Jack's family the next morning, even though it wasn't required. He didn't know what to say. How do you condense someone's life into 5 paragraphs? In the end, he wrote, "Your son was brave, and he made us laugh when we were cold and scared. I'll carry him with me." And he did. For the next year, through firefights, malaria, leeches, and hunger, through more Agent Orange falling like cursed snow, he didn't get wounded, not on the outside, but something inside him had been nicked, cracked. It just didn't show. When he finally came home in 71, no one was at the airport. No parades, no signs. Just a cab driver who didn't ask questions, and a mother who cried when she saw him, but didn't recognize the man standing in her doorway. Her name was Carol. She wasn't my mother, though she liked to pretend she was something close. My real mother, Dana, died when I was 10, lung cancer out of nowhere. She and my dad had been high school sweethearts. Her death broke him in a quiet, permanent way. He never cried in front of me, never skipped work, never stopped fixing things around the house, but he also never smiled the same way again. Carol came into our lives 2 years later. She was different, tall, statuesque, the kind of woman who always wore lipstick, even just to take the trash out. She met my father at the VA clinic where she volunteered, said she admired his strength and stoicism. I remember the first time I saw her. It was Thanksgiving, and she brought a store-bought pie and a bottle of wine I wasn't old enough to drink. She called me Han before she even knew my last name. At first, I tried to stay neutral. My father seemed happier. He shaved more. He stopped falling asleep in his armchair with the TV blaring. Carol brought order. She labeled everything in the pantry, reorganized his tools, made him start going to the doctor regularly. But there was something beneath it all, a quiet possessiveness, a way she would rest her hand on his shoulder just a second too long when I spoke, a way she'd answer questions directed at him. By the time I was in college, she'd moved in full-time, no wedding, no ceremony, just presence, permanent and unshakable. She hung framed photos of her late husband in the hallway, placed her perfume bottles on my mother's vanity. She told me once, "It's good to have a woman's touch around here again." I didn't argue, not out loud, but over time I noticed things, how she'd intercept the mail, how hospital bills were addressed to Robert Kane and Carol Stevens, how my father's military discharge papers, once kept in a locked box in his closet, had migrated to her filing cabinet. I wasn't angry, not yet, just uneasy. It came to a head one winter break when I came home and found the living room completely redone. My mother's quilt, the one she made when I was born, was gone, replaced with some modern gray throw. When I asked where it was, Carol smiled and said, "Oh, that old thing? It was falling apart. I donated it. I nearly lost it." "You donated my mother's quilt? She's been gone 20 years, sweetheart. It's time to live in the present." That was the first time I called her by her name. Not Carol, not ma'am, just flatly, "You had no right." She didn't respond, just blinked, then walked into the kitchen like I'd spilled coffee on the rug. From then on, our relationship was civil but cold, like two diplomats who signed a ceasefire but never forgot the war. The worst part? My father never took sides. He didn't defend her, but he didn't defend me either. He'd just say, "Let's not fight. Life's too short." Maybe it was guilt. Maybe he thought he didn't deserve to hold on to the past. Or maybe, deep down, he was just tired of being the middle of every battlefield. First the jungle, now the living room. As he got older, Carol's control became more subtle, more bureaucratic. She accompanied him to every doctor appointment. When I'd ask about his meds, she'd say, "Don't worry, it's handled." When I offered to help pay for his prescriptions, she'd wave it off. "He's covered. We've got it under control." It wasn't that I didn't trust her, it's that I didn't trust her motives. There's a difference. The truth is, I don't think Carol was evil. She wasn't the wicked stepmother from storybooks. She cooked dinner, paid bills on time, made sure Dad took his pills. But there was always a layer of performance, like she was auditioning for the role of the grieving widow before he was even gone. And maybe that's what scared me most, that in her mind she was already the main character of his ending. There was always something off about his breathing. Even before COVID, long before the ventilator and the blue hospital gowns, I knew something wasn't right. He breathed like the air was heavier for him, like it owed him something it refused to give. But he never complained. That was his nature. I remember watching him mow the lawn when I was a teenager, shirtless, sweat soaking through the waistband of his jeans, pushing the machine in the August heat. Every few minutes he'd stop, bend over with his hands on his knees, and take a long, rattling breath. I'd run out with a bottle of water. "You okay, Dad?" He'd just wave me off. "Just catching my breath, sport. Happens when you've smoked too much jungle air." He called it jungle air. That was his way of talking about the war without really talking about it. That and Nam Cough. He made it sound like a joke, something all vets got, like a badge of honor. But it wasn't funny when it woke him up in the middle of the night, hacking into his pillow, reaching for the inhaler he never admitted he needed. After he turned 65, the doctor visits increased. At first, just checkups, then scans, blood work, referrals. I offered to go with him, but Carol always beat me to it. "He's fine," she'd say afterward, unwrapping a butterscotch candy from her purse. "Just old lungs and stubborn pride." But I saw the pills stacking up, the prednisone, the bronchodilators, the antibiotics. I saw the oxygen tank tucked behind the recliner just in case. I noticed how he moved slower, how he talked less. Eventually, I insisted on seeing the reports myself. It took some arguing, but he handed over a file one night, worn and overstuffed. Inside were years of test results, spirometry reports, CT scans, notes from pulmonologists. One stood out: chronic obstructive pulmonary disease with suspected chemical exposure. No definitive source, just a suggestion, a clinical shrug. Did they ever ask about Agent Orange? I asked. He didn't answer right away, just stared at the television, muted. A war documentary was playing. Tanks, napalm, black and white footage of boys who looked just like him. Once, he finally said, they wrote it down. Then never brought it up again. I asked if he'd ever applied through the VA for compensation. He nodded. Back in '98, got denied. Not enough proof. He sounded tired, not just physically but morally exhausted, like a man who had finally accepted that justice wasn't coming, and maybe never had. I thought they had programs for this, I said. You're a vet. They have programs, he said, but not for everyone. Not if you were in the wrong unit, or if your file went missing, or if the barrel that poisoned you didn't leave a paper trail. Carol chimed in from the kitchen. The last time we tried, they said his exposure location wasn't on the confirmed list. Can you believe that? As if you need GPS to know when you've been sprayed like a weed. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My hands clenched under the table. A few weeks later, he collapsed on the back porch, said he was just dizzy, blamed it on dehydration. But in the ER, his oxygen levels were dangerously low. They gave him a breathing treatment, scanned his lungs again, advanced scarring, possible fibrosis, history unclear. When I asked the doctor if it could be related to military service, he tilted his head like I'd asked about Bigfoot. There's no conclusive link, he said. Anecdotal reports, maybe, but nothing we can diagnose officially. Anecdotal, like my father's life was just a story someone made up. I started reading, obsessively. Late into the night, scrolling through forums, VA documents, declassified reports. Agent Orange was everywhere, sprayed across millions of acres, affecting not only Vietnamese civilians, but thousands of American troops, especially those stationed near Quang Tri, like my dad. The chemical contained dioxin, one of the most toxic compounds known to man, known to cause cancer, neurological damage, immune disorders, and lung disease. But here's the catch. Unless you were in one of the presumed exposure zones listed by the VA, you had to prove your case. Show logs, affidavits, even photos. As if the fog of war had left a receipt. My father didn't keep receipts. He kept everything inside. And now something was eating away at him. Not fast, not like a heart attack or a stroke, but slowly like rot behind drywall. Silent. Invisible. Permanent. On the fourth morning, they called again. Are you available to come in for a care conference? The nurse asked, her voice clinical, rehearsed. What kind of care conference? I asked, already knowing I wouldn't like the answer. Miss Carol Stevens has requested a meeting to discuss your father's prognosis. I stared at the phone in silence, then glanced at the time. It was 7:12 a.m. I hadn't slept. I'd been sitting on the edge of my couch all night, listening to the same voicemail from Dad on repeat. Hey, just checking in. Call me back when you can. It felt like a different lifetime. I arrived at the hospital an hour later. COVID restrictions still limited access, but I was allowed in with an escort. They took me to a small consultation room. Gray walls, muted lights, the kind of space designed for bad news. Carol was already inside, sitting upright, legs crossed, hands folded in her lap like she was attending a meeting at the bank. A doctor stood beside her, holding a tablet, mask covering most of his face but not his eyes. Those tired, pitying eyes. Carol looked up. We've been waiting, she said, like I was late for dinner. The doctor cleared his throat. Mr. Kane, I'm Dr. Alvarez, your father's attending physician. As you know, he was placed on a ventilator 4 days ago. His condition has not improved. I nodded, saying nothing. We've done everything we can. High-flow oxygen, sedation, full respiratory support. But his lungs are severely damaged. His blood oxygen levels are critically low even with assistance. At this point, we have to consider quality of life and likelihood of recovery. I looked at Carol. She wasn't crying, wasn't even blinking. What are you saying? I asked. Dr. Alvarez hesitated. Your father is not expected to recover, and Ms. Stevens has indicated that he would not have wanted to live like this, on machines, unable to breathe on his own. My stomach turned. She doesn't speak for him, I said. She has medical power of attorney, the doctor replied gently. The documentation is on file. I turned to Carol. When did he give you that? 3 months ago, she said. We had it notarized. He wanted to be prepared. I shook my head. He didn't tell me. He didn't want to burden you, she said. He told me he'd had enough of hospitals, enough of machines keeping people alive when they're already gone. I felt the room shrinking, like the walls were closing in. You're going to pull the plug, I said flatly. We're going to withdraw life support, she corrected, as if the phrasing made it less horrifying. He's not brain dead. You said he's sedated. He's not conscious, the doctor said, and the likelihood of him regaining consciousness is extremely low. Even if he did, his lung function would not sustain independent breathing. I looked at Carol again. Her face was calm. Too calm. You're not his wife, I snapped. She didn't flinch. I was there for 15 years. Every appointment. Every late night. Where were you? I'm his son, I said through gritted teeth. You don't get to decide how this ends. I already have. The silence that followed was heavy. Dr. Alvarez looked down, avoiding my eyes. I stood up. You're making a mistake. Carol stood too. No, I'm honoring his wishes. You just don't want to see it. I left the room. I couldn't breathe. Not like my father, his breath stolen by war and chemicals and time, but in my own way. My chest felt like it was closing. Outside, I stood by the glass window of the ICU. I couldn't see him, not clearly, but I knew he was there. Tubes in his throat, machines blinking. A body suspended between life and the decision of a woman he never married. That night, they withdrew support. No phone call, no second meeting, just a nurse calling the next morning. We made him comfortable. He passed at 2:42 a.m. Carol held a private service the next day. I wasn't invited. I stood outside the chapel, watching through the glass as she gave a speech, her voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. She wore black, clutched a folded flag, and cried on cue. My father's body lay in a coffin draped with stars and stripes. I wanted to burst in and scream, "This isn't yours. You don't get to grieve louder than me." But I didn't. I just turned away. And for the first time since I was a child, I cried so hard I couldn't stop. Not because he died, but because I hadn't been allowed to say goodbye. The funeral was set for the following Tuesday. I found out through a Facebook post. Carol had uploaded a black and white photo of my father in uniform, along with the caption, "Today we say goodbye to a true American hero. Private service, invitation only. Rest in peace, Robert." Private service? I stared at those words for a long time, like they were in a foreign language. No phone call, no message, no space for me in the goodbye. I drove down anyway. 3 hours on the interstate with my teeth clenched and the radio off. It was raining, because of course it was. The kind of cold, steady drizzle that seeps into your clothes and bones. The chapel was small, tucked into the corner of a quiet cemetery with rows of white headstones that stood like silent witnesses. I parked across the street and watched from behind tinted windows. Mourners trickled in, maybe 20 people. Neighbors, a few men from the VA support group, a retired colonel who'd spoken at the last 4th of July barbecue, and Carol. She stood by the entrance in black, her posture perfect, holding a tissue in one hand and a folded flag in the other. When the hearse arrived, she placed her hand on the casket like it belonged to her, like she was the only one who'd ever known his story. I waited until everyone was inside before I stepped out of the car. The chapel doors were closed, but I could still hear the muffled voice of the priest. I walked up the steps, opened the door just enough to peek through. There he was, my father, in a flag-draped coffin, polished wood and brass handles gleaming under the soft yellow light. A photo sat on an easel beside it, one I'd never seen before. He was older in it, smiling beside Carol on some beach, his arm around her shoulders, a veteran's cap tilted on his head. I looked for a picture of us, me and him. Graduation, baseball games, fishing trips. There wasn't one, no mention of me in the program either. I found one later in a trash bin behind the chapel. It read, "Robert Kane is survived by his beloved partner of 15 years, Carol Stevens, and dear friends who cherished his unwavering spirit." Beloved partner. No son, no family, just Carol, standing at the pulpit, delivering a eulogy like she was accepting an award. Her voice cracked at all the right moments. She spoke about his strength, his loyalty, his courage. She said he never stopped fighting, that he always believed in doing what was right. I wanted to burst through the doors, to shout, "Then why wasn't I invited?" But I didn't. Instead, I sat on the steps outside, drenched in rain, watching through stained glass as she closed the service with a prayer. Afterward, as people filed out, no one noticed me, not until Carol stepped outside and caught my eye. She blinked, surprised, then quickly composed herself. "You came," she said. "I wasn't invited. I didn't think you'd want to be here. You thought wrong." She looked down, then back at me. "This day isn't about you. I never said it was." I paused. "But I'm his son." Silence. Then coldly, "You haven't acted like one." That hit harder than I expected. She walked past me and toward her car, the folded flag still in her hand. I didn't follow. Instead, I walked around the back of the chapel. I needed air, or maybe answers. Anything to fill the hole that kept widening in my chest. That's when I saw the groundskeeper, an older man in a windbreaker, smoking behind the tool shed. "You family?" he asked. "Son," I replied. He took a drag. "Funny. The lady said he had no kids." My jaw tightened. "She said that?" He nodded. "Said his only next of kin passed years ago, that she'd been his common-law wife for over a decade. Guess that gave her the right to sign everything." I swallowed hard. "Did she handle the burial?" He shrugged. "Prepaid. Quiet type, your dad. Planned most of it a while back. Had a file with his name on it. Sealed." "Sealed?" "Yeah. Like legal documents or something. She picked it up last week before we finalized the paperwork. I didn't say anything, but something inside me cracked. That night, I drove home soaked and silent. I kept thinking about that folder, about how fast everything had moved, about how Carol had taken control of every decision, from the ventilator to the casket to the flag in her hands. She didn't just bury him. She buried the story of who he really was, and I wasn't going to let that be the end of it. I went back to the house a week after the funeral. It was empty now. Carol had taken what she wanted and vanished like smoke. The neighbors said she left for Florida, said the cold was bad for her arthritis, one of them offered, like it was a valid excuse for disappearing with a dead man's legacy. The front door creaked like it hadn't been opened in days. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with dust and silence. The furniture was still there, but the soul of the place was gone. No more boots by the door. No more half-empty coffee cups by the sink. Just shadows and echoes. I didn't come for closure. I came for answers. I started in the garage, then the basement. Cabinets, drawers, toolboxes. I was looking for anything. Files, letters, something that told the truth about who was supposed to make the final decisions, about who my father really trusted. In the far corner of the basement, under a workbench he'd built in the 80s, I found an old army footlocker. Olive green, rusted along the hinges, locked with a padlock I hadn't seen in years. I knew the code, 1 to 9, 6 to 8. The year he enlisted. Inside were mementos, medals wrapped in old cloth, a Purple Heart I'd never seen before, folded maps from Vietnam, a stack of faded letters tied with a shoelace, and at the bottom, wrapped in a plastic sheet, was a legal envelope. On it, in his handwriting, was written, "Last will, personal copy, do not discard." I opened it with shaking hands. It was dated October 14th, 2015. Typed but signed in pen, his signature, clear and steady. The will left everything, his savings, his house, his military pension, to me. Not a mention of Carol, not even a token. More importantly, it designated me as his medical proxy, his executor, and the sole decision-maker for all end-of-life choices. I sat down on the cold cement floor and stared at it for a long time. He had chosen me. Not her. All those nights I'd wondered if he'd picked her because she was closer, more convenient. All those questions, why he didn't say anything, why he let her speak for him, I thought maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe I didn't matter as much as I wanted to believe. But this was clear, and someone had hidden it. I flipped through the folder. Attached was a receipt from a local law office, confirming the will had been notarized and filed. The lawyer's name was still on the header. James D. Walker Esquire, I called him that afternoon. The receptionist put me on hold, then transferred me. The voice on the other end was tired, gravelly. "Mr. Kane's son? Yes. I remember your father well. I found a copy of his will," I said. "Dated 2015, signed and notarized through your office." He confirmed it. "He filed it with us and took a copy for his records," Walker said. "Said he wanted things clear for his son, in case anything happened. Was it ever updated?" There was a pause. "Actually, yes. A woman came in last year with a new version. Said Mr. Kane had revised it. It named her as the beneficiary and executor. She claimed he was too ill to come in but provided a signed statement." My stomach dropped. Was that signature verified? He hesitated. It looked shaky. "We requested follow-up but never received it. We never officially filed the new version. Do you still have it? I can send you a copy. But legally, without confirmation from the client, the 2015 will is still valid, assuming it's the latest legitimate version on record." I thanked him and hung up. My hands were sweating, my pulse hammered behind my eyes. Carol had tried to rewrite the end of his story. She'd brought in a fake will, unfiled, unverified, and hoped no one would notice. And it almost worked. I spent that night rereading the 2015 will line by line. Every paragraph felt like a whisper from him, every clause a reassurance. "I trusted you. I wanted you to know. I left this for you to find." In the margin of the last page, he'd scribbled a note in pencil, his handwriting, rough but unmistakable. If you're reading this, it means I'm not there to explain. Just know, I always knew you'd do the right thing. Don't let anyone rewrite what matters. I felt something shift inside me then. Grief gave way to fire, to purpose. He hadn't been weak. He hadn't surrendered. He'd been silenced. And now it was up to me to bring the truth back into the light. I hadn't seen Frank Turner since I was 12. He'd shown up to a Memorial Day cookout that year, wearing a denim jacket full of patches and a Marine Corps cap pulled low over his eyes. He brought ribs, cracked open a beer by noon, and spent the whole afternoon making my dad laugh. Really laugh, the kind that showed his teeth. Now, 20 years later, I found him living in a trailer park on the edge of town, surrounded by flags, old ammo crates, and the slow hum of a broken air conditioner. He opened the door before I even knocked. "Took you long enough," he said. I saw the obituary. I stepped inside. The place smelled like cigarettes and motor oil. The walls were covered in photos, Vietnam, boot camp, reunion barbecues. There was a framed picture of him and my dad, both in uniform, sitting on a tank, grinning like kids who hadn't seen hell yet. "I found the will," I said, not wasting time. Frank didn't flinch. He just nodded and pointed to the worn-out recliner across from him. "He left everything to you." "I know," he told me. I blinked. "He did? Back in 15? He came over here with a six-pack and said, 'Frank, I want to make sure my son gets what's his when I go. Carol doesn't need it. She'll be fine.'" He paused. Didn't think it would get this messy. I told him about the fake will, about Carol filing something unofficial, about the lawyer confirming it had never been properly submitted. Frank didn't look surprised. He just leaned forward and exhaled. That woman, she cared for him, sure, but she also controlled him, especially when he got sick. I think he was scared, not of her exactly, but of being too weak to fight back. That hit harder than I expected. "He ever say anything?" I asked. "About her? About end-of-life stuff?" Frank nodded slowly. "A few months before he went downhill, he said something weird. We were sitting on the porch. He said, 'I don't want to end up in a bed with tubes while someone else decides when I stop breathing.' Then he looked me in the eye and said, 'If I ever can't speak for myself, make sure it's my son who does the talking.'" I stared at him. "You sure he said that?" Frank nodded again. "Swear on my dog tags." He reached over to the coffee table and pulled out a small manila envelope. He also asked me to hang on to this, said he didn't trust email anymore, told me to give it to you if anything happened. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a printed email draft, dated just 2 weeks before Dad was hospitalized. The subject line read, "To VA benefits, Agent Orange reassessment." The body was short, typed in all caps like he hadn't figured out the formatting. "I served in Quang Tri in 1969-70. I was sprayed repeatedly. I have COPD, breathing issues, and was recently told I have pulmonary fibrosis. I was denied before, but I believe my records were incomplete. I have witnesses. I need this reconsidered. I'm not asking for a handout. I just want to know that my service meant something." Below it, in pen, he had scribbled, "Frank, hold this. I don't want Carol to see it yet. She thinks it's useless." I folded the paper and held it in my lap. It wasn't just the email. It was everything he hadn't said. The unfiled complaint, the hidden will, the silent plea, "Don't let them forget what happened to me." Frank poured us each a glass of cheap whiskey. We drank in silence for a while, two men tied to the same ghost in different ways. "You know what pisses me off most?" Frank finally said. "They told us the jungle was dangerous, that we might not make it home, but they never said the real danger was decades later, when nobody gives a damn, and the chemicals finally finish what the bullets didn't." I nodded, my throat tight. "I'm going to fix this," I said. Frank looked at me, serious for the first time. "You better," he said, "because you're the only one left who can." The next morning, I drove straight to my father's primary care clinic. The receptionist gave me the same skeptical look I'd come to expect whenever I said the word Agent Orange. "I'm just trying to get his full medical records," I explained. "Everything from the past 10 years. She clicked her tongue, tapped on the keyboard. "Do you have power of attorney?" I held up the notarized will. "I'm the legal executor. His son." She scanned it, made a copy, and told me to wait. 20 minutes later, she returned with a stack of files in a manila envelope, too thin. I knew there was more. "These are only the outpatient visits," she said. "You'll have to contact the hospital directly for anything else. Imaging, inpatient care, labs." So I did. Over the next 3 days, I called every hospital my father had ever visited, every specialist he'd ever been referred to. I filled out forms, submitted identity verifications, and faxed copies of the will so many times I nearly memorized the notary's signature. Some places were helpful, others were indifferent. One office said flat out, "We don't keep records past 7 years unless there's an ongoing case." An ongoing case. That phrase stuck in my throat like a thorn. I called James Walker, the lawyer who'd filed my father's 2015 will. "Can I do anything with this?" I asked. "Can I challenge what Carol did?" "You can contest any conflicting claim," he replied, "but you'll need to prove intent, malicious alteration, concealment, or coercion. Otherwise, it's a civil matter." I could hear the fatigue in his voice. He'd probably seen too many of these. Quiet deaths turned legal messes. Families torn in the aftermath, not by grief, but by paperwork. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by documents. Medical notes, emails, old photos, the printed will, and Frank's letter. A storm rumbled outside, thunder shaking the window panes. I stared at a blank document on my laptop, then I started typing. My father didn't die of COVID. Not really. He died of a slow, silent war no one talks about. He died because our government poisoned its own soldiers, and then turned its back when they came home breathing like ghosts. I poured it all out. The Agent Orange, the fake will, the hospital pulling life support after just 4 days. The funeral I wasn't allowed to attend. I named no one directly. I wasn't writing to shame. I was writing to be heard. I published it on Medium, under my name, with the title, "The Final War My Father Fought, A Son's Story." At first, nothing happened. A few likes, a couple of reposts, but then, 2 days later, I got an email from a woman named Sharon Mayfield. Her subject line read, "I thought I was the only one." She was the daughter of a Navy corpsman who died in 2017, also of pulmonary fibrosis, also served in Vietnam, also denied Agent Orange compensation. Then came another message, and another. Within a week, the post had over 50,000 views, veterans, their children, their caregivers, all writing with the same stories, same diseases, same denials. One man wrote, "My dad died coughing himself to death, and the VA told us it was asthma." Another said, "They promised him benefits. He died before they even opened his case." I realized then that this wasn't just about my father. It was about all of them, all the Robert Kanes of the world, men who fought for their country and came home with invisible wounds that took decades to kill them. The anger simmered beneath the surface, not loud, not explosive, just steady, focused. I reached out to the Vietnam Veterans of America. They connected me to a legal advocacy group that specialized in chemical exposure cases. I forwarded them the will, the letter, Frank's statement, and the draft email to the VA. Within days, a case file was opened, not for money, not for revenge, for truth. The attorney assigned to me, Marla Jensen, called it a borderline wrongful death claim. But she also warned, these cases move slow, especially when the paper trail is old or missing. Be prepared to fight for months, maybe years. I'm prepared, I said, because the truth was I wasn't just fighting for justice. I was fighting to rewrite the ending. It started with the voicemail. I was clearing out the bottom drawer of my dad's nightstand when I found his old flip phone, the one he stopped using after Carol bought him a smartphone he could barely figure out. The battery was dead, screen cracked, but I knew it might still hold something small, something real. I charged it overnight. The next morning, I turned it on. 5 saved voicemails. All from me, nothing special. Birthday calls, check-ins, a message about a dentist appointment, and one audio memo unlabeled, dated 2 weeks before he went to the hospital. I almost didn't press play, but I did. His voice came through rough, strained, weaker than I'd ever heard it. You could hear him struggling to breathe between every sentence, but the words were clear. If you're listening to this, it probably means I didn't make it. Wheezing, cough. I wanted to say this somewhere, just in case I didn't get a chance to later. Because knowing me, I probably waited too long. I always thought there'd be more time, more good days, pause, breathing. I didn't trust the system. Still don't. Not the VA. Not the doctors who smiled and gave me inhalers and told me to rest. They never said the chemicals would catch up to me. Hell, they barely admitted they used them. We all knew. We felt it on our skin. Watched it fall like dirty snow. I was scared. Not of dying, really. I saw enough of that in '69. I was scared of becoming a shell, of lying in some bed, pumped full of air and drugs, while someone else decided if I got to stay or not. That someone was supposed to be you, Long pause, longer breath, like he's trying not to break. "You've always been good, kid. Better than I deserved. I know I wasn't the easiest father. I held back a lot. Didn't always say the right things. But you were my compass. My reason for trying to live like a civilian again. I know I didn't say it enough, but I was proud. Of who you became. Of how you stood up when I couldn't. If Carol told you otherwise, don't believe her. She meant well, but she doesn't understand what it's like to come home and never really feel home again. I should have made things clearer. I thought the will was enough, but I realize now, the world doesn't care much for paper unless someone fights for it. Breathing, a cough, a rattle. So fight, not just for me, for the others like me, for the guys who never made it home, for the ones who did, but were forgotten anyway. If they don't remember our names, make them remember our stories. I love you, son. Don't let me disappear." The recording ended. I sat frozen, the phone still in my hand. My lungs felt like they couldn't hold enough air. My eyes burned. I must have played it 5 times. Each time I heard something different. Regret, guilt, strength, clarity. My father, who never talked about emotions, who never said I love you unless prompted, had left it all there, buried in an old phone most people would have tossed in the trash. He hadn't been silent. He hadn't been weak. He'd just been waiting for someone to listen. Later that day, I uploaded the audio to a drive, made copies, and sent one to Marla, the attorney handling the case. She listened quietly, then said, "This isn't just evidence, it's testimony." And it was a confession, a plea, a directive. It was the final piece I didn't know I needed. It was buried in a stack of old tax papers, wedged between receipts and expired insurance forms. Just another folded piece of paper in a manila folder that smelled faintly of tobacco and time. The letter was dated September 2nd, 2020, just 2 months before my father was hospitalized. Typed, single-spaced, signed but never mailed. It was addressed to Office of Veterans Affairs, Washington, D.C., C.C., House Committee on Veterans Affairs. The subject line read simply, "RE, chemical exposure and denied recognition, Vietnam War Service." I sat down, unfolded the letter, and began to read. "To whom it may concern, I'm writing as a 73-year-old Marine Corps veteran who served in Quang Tri, Vietnam, from 1969 to 1970. I was deployed during peak spraying operations involving Agent Orange. I remember the day the sky turned white. We were told it was just for vegetation control. Nobody told us it would enter our lungs, stay in our blood, kill us slow. I have been living with breathing issues for over 3 decades. I have COPD, scarred lungs, sleep apnea, oxygen dependency. I've applied for assistance before and was denied due to insufficient evidence. That's the part that eats at me. Insufficient evidence. I served, I bled. I came home, and now I can't prove to the country I served that what's killing me is real. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for acknowledgement. I'm asking for someone to look at my records and tell me I'm not crazy for believing the war followed me home. Every day, more veterans die without their names on a list. We get told we're unlucky. We're old. That's what old lungs do. But we know better. You didn't need GPS coordinates to get sprayed. You just had to be breathing in the wrong place. I've been quiet about this for years. I didn't want to make noise. Marines don't whine, but I'm running out of air and time. So this is me asking, before my breath runs out completely, don't let us be forgotten. Sincerely, Robert M. Kane, USMC, retired Quang Tri, 3rd Marine Division, 1969 to 1970. When I finished reading, I sat for a long time, staring at the paper. It shook slightly in my hands, not because of the air conditioner, but because something inside me was cracking and couldn't stay quiet anymore. He'd written it. He'd meant every word. But he'd never sent it. Maybe he didn't believe it would matter. Maybe Carol told him not to bother. Maybe the silence of decades wore down his hope. But now I had it, and suddenly it mattered more than ever. That night, I scanned the letter and added it to the case file Marla was building. I sent it to the VA, the House Committee, and every journalist who had reached out to me after my article. No more secrets, no more silence. I also printed a copy and pinned it to the bulletin board above my desk, right next to the photo of him in uniform. Same signature, same man. But this time his voice wasn't buried. It was right there, in ink, in words. Later, as I made coffee, I kept thinking about one line in particular. You didn't need GPS coordinates to get sprayed. You just had to be breathing in the wrong place. That was my father's truth. And now it was mine to carry. He'd tried in his own quiet way to be heard. Now I would make sure he was. The story didn't go viral overnight. It took a week, then another. First it was just a few reposts, comments from other veterans' families, quiet nods from people who didn't want to make noise, but couldn't stay silent either. Then one morning my inbox exploded. An editor from The Atlantic reached out, then a producer from a local NPR affiliate, then a writer from Military Times. They'd read my post, they'd listened to the recording, and now they wanted to talk. The first interview was over the phone. A woman named Joelle asked thoughtful questions about my dad, about the letter, about the recording. She didn't rush me, didn't try to frame it as sensational, just listened. I told her about the will, the hospital, the fake power of attorney, the sealed documents from the funeral home. I gave her names, dates, scanned copies. I didn't hold anything back. A week later, the article dropped. My father was killed by a war that never ended byline, a son's fight for recognition after. Agent Orange had opened with a quote from Dad's audio message. If they don't remember our names, make them remember our stories. The article spread fast. Within days, veterans organizations reposted it. Advocacy groups emailed. Law students volunteered research. Former military nurses shared their memories. Some remembered my dad. One said she treated him once in '92 and still remembered how polite he was, even through the coughing fits. Then came the emails, hundreds, from sons, daughters, widows, grandchildren. Each message told the same story in different words. He sounds like my father. We went through the same. Thank you for saying what we couldn't. One man, a 78-year-old Marine, wrote simply, "Tell Robert he's not alone." It was overwhelming, but also grounding. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was just reacting to what had been done. I was building something, momentum, truth, maybe even change. Marla, our attorney, used the wave to file a formal request with the VA Inspector General's office, asking them to review how Robert Kane's claim had been handled and dismissed. She attached the article, the recording, and the letter. I can't promise they'll admit fault, she warned, but they'll have to respond now. At the same time, I started getting calls. One was from Congressman Richards, who served on the House Veterans Affairs Committee. He asked if I'd be willing to speak during a subcommittee hearing on Agent Orange exposure. "I'm not a politician," I said. "You're a son," he replied. "That's more powerful." The hearing took place via Zoom. I sat in my apartment, wearing my dad's Marine Corps pin on my collar, staring into a laptop camera while men in suits nodded politely. I read from his letter. I played 20 seconds of the recording, just the part where he said, "Make them remember our stories." The room went silent. When I finished, one of the congressmen asked, "If your father were here, what would you want him to know?" I didn't hesitate. That I heard him, that he wasn't crazy, that his breath wasn't wasted. A pause, and that he didn't disappear. The next morning, I went to the VA's website. His name wasn't there yet. Not on any list, not in any archive. But something had changed. People were listening now, and so I kept talking. I accepted more interviews. I wrote follow-up essays. I helped other families navigate the system, sharing templates, lawyer contacts, appeal strategies. Dad's voice had opened a door, and I was going to hold it open as long as I could. But it wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about remembrance. Because he was right. If they don't remember our names, they damn well better remember our stories. It was quiet that morning. No cameras, no journalists, no hearings or inboxes full of unread messages. Just me, a folded chair, and the wind rolling slow through the trees like a hymn without words. I stood before the headstone that now bore his name, Robert M. Kane, USMC, Vietnam War veteran, 1947 to 2020. He never stopped serving. It had taken 6 months, countless emails, and the help of a veterans advocacy group to move him here, to the National Cemetery, the one he never asked for but had always deserved. Carol hadn't protested. By then, public pressure and the legal findings had closed most of her doors. She faded into silence, and honestly, I didn't need revenge. I just needed this. A proper goodbye. I set up the folding chair beside the grave and pulled a small Bluetooth speaker from my bag. It was dented dusty, same one he used to play Johnny Cash on while fixing the fence. I pressed play, and his voice filled the space. "If you're listening to this, it probably means I didn't make it." Birds chirped softly in the background. but I barely noticed. I was watching the letters on the headstone. The way his name carved into stone looked somehow gentler than when it had just lived on envelopes or medical records. I let the recording play all the way through. No skipping, no interruptions, just his words, one last time, in the right place. When it ended, I sat there a long while. No tears left to spill. Just a slow ache. And something else, something steadier. Peace, maybe. Closure wasn't about finishing, it was about continuing. I reached into my bag again and pulled out a copy of his unsent letter, the one to the VA, now laminated. I placed it at the base of the headstone, weighed down by a small river rock we'd found together when I was 8, skipping stones at Lake Erie. Then I added something else, a framed photo. Not the one of him and Carol, not his marine portrait. This one was simpler. It was us, me at age 7, sitting on his shoulders, both of us laughing under a 4th of July sky. That was the man I remembered. Not just a soldier, not just a statistic. But my father. Before I left, I said what I'd been waiting months to say. You were heard, Dad, loud and clear, and they listened. I stood up. You didn't disappear. The wind stirred a little harder then. Or maybe I just imagined it. On the way out, I passed row after row of white stones, names I didn't know but somehow recognized. Men like Robert Kane. Soldiers who'd lived entire wars in silence. Some who died overseas, others who died coughing at home, with no one to remember why. But not him. Not anymore. He had a voice now, and through me, through every repost and retelling and ripple he caused, he still does. And as I walked back to the car, I turned one last time and looked across the field. Somewhere in that quiet, I swear I heard his voice again. Not words this time, just presence. The kind you don't need proof to feel, just breath, and memory, and story. If you're listening to this now, maybe you know someone like my dad, someone whose story was never told, or worse, never believed. So let me ask you, have you ever known a Robert Kane? Someone who gave everything and got silence in return? Tell me in the comments, tell their story. Because the only way we lose them is if we forget